Stick with me here. Let's bring in David Wessel, Senior Fellow in Economic Studies at the Brookings Institution. He suspects that putting more names on the Fed chair potential list will put even more pressure on Powell when it comes to rate cuts. David, let's put this back on the screen here, these Fed chair candidates for just a moment. It looks like a choir all singing against what the Fed chair, Jay Powell, has been doing, and perhaps in support of President Trump's call for rate cuts. What do you expect the impact of this large field to be?
Well, first of all, I'm a little suspicious of this list. Lori Logan, for instance, the Dallas Fed president, has been pretty hawkish. It's hard to believe the president is going to put her on the board. The current vice chair, Phil Jefferson, has been pretty low profile. He's a Biden appointee. He's been aligned with Jay Powell. So I wonder what this is all about. One possibility here is that Secretary Bessent is putting names up there, and then that encourages people who think they have a shot, either at the chair's job or maybe a seat on the board, to write or speak out in support of the president's call for lower interest rates. Mark Summerlin wrote an op-ed the other day endorsing the president's call for lower rates. So I'm not quite sure what to make of this, but I agree with Steve. It does suggest that a decision isn't imminent. I just don't really believe all 11 of these people are serious. I would, however, love to see David Zervos as the Fed chair. He would be the Fed chair with the longest hair since the history of the Federal Reserve since 1913. So that would be at least something to talk about.
That is true, and perhaps the most facial hair in a while as well. Steve Leisman, is this perhaps that situation that a lot of job seekers have become familiar with, where maybe the hiring folks already have a pretty good idea of who they have in mind, but they post the job anyway and make it look like there are a lot of potential candidates?
Yeah, there's some speculation that Scott Bessent pulls a Dick Cheney, which you may remember, John, was when he was interviewing for George Bush's vice presidential candidates and ended up picking himself. But I don't know if that's the case. You'll remember the president removed Bessent, or said Bessent had removed himself. What's interesting about that, John, is that somebody told me that it's not really Bessent's call to remove himself, that if the president wants Bessent to be Fed chair, that's entirely possible. I think the latest probabilities showed, or the latest betting showed Waller being a leading candidate. That would be an interesting one. I think David's right. There are people who should be taken seriously on this list and people perhaps less seriously, and why they're on the list is unclear to me. Phil Jefferson is, I believe, not going to go out and change his very non-public demeanor and start writing positive op-eds about the Trump administration's economy or how he's going to cut rates apart from whatever the Fed chair, Jay Powell, wants. So it is interesting. I would say if I looked at that list, Zervos is a huge possibility. He's also, along with Jay Powell, have something in common. They've both been to Dead and Company shows, for what that is worth. Kevin Hassett and Kevin Warsh began as probably the two favorites. It's an interesting idea. I wonder what Wessel thinks of this, that the list has expanded beyond those two, suggesting that maybe the president is not happy with either of those two, or just having those two along with Waller on the list.
David Wessel, is it that, or perhaps that he's expanding the search beyond the chair to whoever he might nominate next?
Right. So I think Steve's right. I wouldn't rule out Scott Bessent as the guy who gets the job in the end. I think the other thing to think about here is the president's going to have a couple of opportunities to put people on the Board of Governors. There's the Kugler seat that he's filled temporarily with Steve Mirren. Presumably Jay Powell leaves. There's a seat there. And then there are other governors who may or may not stay. And so some of this may be trying people out for seats on the Board of Governors if, for instance, Michael Barr decides to leave, or Chris Waller, if he doesn't become chair, decides to leave. So I think there's a lot of balls in the air here and a lot of trial balloons.